I'm grateful to have you on the show because I had a question that popped up yesterday, and it has to do with what happens if a president and the federal government fail to follow a judge's orders. And what recourse do the courts really truly have? And I have this scenario. There's this judge, Paula Zenas, and she is one of the judges involved in the deportation case of Abrego Garcia, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And she had asked for a status report, basically. Is the Trump administration doing to facilitate the return of this man? And no response, crickets. She gets nothing from the Trump administration. And so she says yesterday, all right, I'm going to require 4 Trump administration officials to come and testify from State Department, from Department of Homeland Security, from ICE. You guys are going to have to come and you're going to have to sit here and tell me what you're doing to facilitate this man's return. My question is, if those Trump administration officials ignore her orders to come testify, can't Trump just pardon them? And so really there's no recourse at all?
Well, that's such a great and complicated question, Kim. Can I give you a sort of a bit of a historical answer?
Please.
President Andrew Jackson had the famous Trail of Tears, where Native Americans were forced to go from one state to another. They were dispossessed without compensation. They were treated terribly. The case went to the Supreme Court in the 1800s, and the Supreme Court basically said, President Jackson, you cannot do that. Mm-hmm. And Jackson famously said, the Supreme Court has made their order. Let's see them enforce it. And the failure in our Constitution, if you want to call it that, is that the president has the power of being commander in chief, and the Congress has the power of the purse. And the judiciary basically rules at the end of the day by the respect that the population has in its integrity, in its, getting the law right, and in the idea that, of course, we do what the courts say, because what the courts say is law, and we follow the law. We have a rule of law. So your question goes to the very heart of what happens when an administration is not in good faith like that, and what happens when the population is represented by Republicans, who it's not a partisan thing, but you have to just look at it and say that they've been cowardly and craven. They won't stand up for their own prerogatives, and they certainly won't stand up for the rule of law and the separation of power. So what really happens? Now, in this case, I think that the judiciary does have an army. It's called the U.S. Marshal Service, and they can't stop the Trail of Tears or a major invasion or something outside the United States. That's a power that they don't have. Even if they had an army, that's a power that the courts don't have. But this order, this judge can enforce. So she will order those 4 people to come to court. You remember when it's Bannon and Peter Navarro refused to show up in Congress, and they didn't have a good reason. They were held in contempt, and they both served a 3-month sentence in prison. I think that's what awaits those 4 officials. And that's why I think that at the end of the posturing and performance art by Trump, they will abide by the order, because those 4 people could actually go to jail. And I think they would for criminal contempt. There's sort of a fine line between criminal and civil contempt, sort of inside baseball, but it's quite relevant to what's going on right now. Mm-hmm. Civil contempt is where you have the keys to the jail in your own hand. The idea is, until you turn over that document or until you testify, since you don't have a privilege, I'm going to lock you up. You tell me when you're going to abide by my order, and when your lawyer says you're going to abide by my order, I'll bring you back to court, and you will purge yourself of the civil contempt, let's say by testifying or by turning over the document, so you have the keys to the jail in your own hand. That's not true in civil contempt. Civil contempt, you've already committed the crime of contempt. And now the question is, once you're prosecuted and convicted of that crime, what should your punishment be? And so with Navarro and Bannon, the punishment meted out by the federal court to each of them was 3 months in custody, and they served it. So your excellent question is, we go down that road, and it happens the way that I just said. And now these 4 officials are held in criminal contempt. And at the end of the day, before they actually go into prison, Trump says, I'm giving you a pardon. And unfortunately, he can do that. Mm-hmm. It appears under the law that he can do that. There's a famous precedent called, I think, in re or ex parte Grossman. It's decided by the U.S. Supreme Court 80, 100 years ago. And the Chief Justice in the majority in that case said, if a president were to do that all the time, the president should be impeached. That seems like an impeachable offense. In other words, officials under the president are committing a crime, but the president says, you know what, I'm pardoning this, I'm pardoning that. Yes, one or two are probably something that a president can do. But if there's a pattern of that, like there would be a pattern here, Trump means to defy the law. He means to not obey it. And so through his lower officials, he grants pardon after pardon so that this investigation and these orders of the judge are completely frustrated, even though an innocent person, a person who didn't have due process, we know the government has said was wrongly deported to this hellhole prison. Will the Republicans in the Congress vote articles of impeachment? No, as things currently stand. And if they were, would the Republican Senate, along with the Democrats, would 67 of them vote to convict and remove President Trump from office? No, they would not. So he may play this out. And I guess here, Kim, the answer will be the court of public opinion. Will people be disgusted by it? And of course, one of the problems, and I don't say this lightly because I followed this case, and I guessed a little bit wrong on this case. I thought Trump would try to be somewhat of a statesman in this situation and say, you know what? We wrongly sent this one guy. Let's deal with this one guy. I got the tariffs. I got a million other problems. Everybody hates me. I've destroyed the economy. Rich people hate me. Republicans hate me. Forget people who are Democrats or independents. I got the rich and the Republicans hating me. I got all the farmers who can't sell their crops to China or other places. I can deal with this. I can get this one guy off my ledger. I thought he would get this one guy off the negative balance sheet, but no, he hasn't. So we'll see if public opinion is revolted by this. It's not the most sympathetic case because everyone says if this were you or me or Mark or Pat, there would be a totally different groundswell of public opinion. I mean, let's face it, fair or unfair. If it were you, me, Mark, or Pat, then this fellow, the allegations of MS-13 have never been proven. Now they're leaked the fact that supposedly his devoted wife made a domestic violence complaint against him 3 or 4 years ago. They probably knew that. Trump probably knew that, and that they figured they were playing with house money because if things got really bad, they would release that little tidbit. So they're fighting back in the court of public opinion. But I do think the court of public opinion is going to get revolted by this, but not as much as I would think, not as much as saying, this is the rule of law. And let me just say one last thing, Miranda, we have Miranda warnings. We don't have Miranda warnings because Miranda was a saint. We have Miranda warnings because he was a guy who was in a lot of trouble with the law, but he was entitled to these Miranda warnings. So Abrego Garcia, he may have a few blemishes, but, he's the kind of person who ends up being the poster boy for our constitutional rights. And he's a good enough poster boy for me, even if he had a DV 4 years ago.
Well, you talk about the court of public opinion and the tarnished look of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Is he or is he not a gang member? He wasn't born in America. He has, these blemishes on his past to, questions about whether he and his wife, he treated women appropriately. But the question, or I think the concern is, if you don't care about his due process, then what you have is our next topic about deporting U.S. citizens. So there's a line here, a very blurry line, where if you don't care about his due process, then you don't care about people who are born here and the due process that we should have and be very concerned about, because now we have Trump for the second time saying that, even if you were born here, even if you're homegrown, if you've done something wrong, why not deport you too to this, CCOT prison in El Salvador? Trump and his administration apparently are currently studying laws to see if they are able to send U.S. citizens who commit violent crimes to prisons in foreign countries. What law would allow that? What law does it break? I mean, I feel like that's so un-American that I'm hoping that you can lay it all out, David Katz, and tell me exactly how that's illegal and why.
Well, it is totally unprecedented. So, of course, Trump glibly says, well, that's why I asked my attorney general to look into it because it's
Mhm.
unprecedented. The reason it's unprecedented is it so patently violates so many constitutional and even statutory rights. You know, when you get a sentence in America, actually, whether you're an American citizen or not, when you get a sentence, there are certain specifications to it. Now, we have prisoner transfer treaties with some countries. So if you're from France, and you want to serve your sentence in France, and both the United States and France agree, a French citizen could serve their sentence in France. But this idea that an American citizen, they could make a deal with France, much less with El Salvador, to send you to some terrible prison there, that would violate, I mean, your due process right, as well as the right to serve your sentence. You get sentenced to the custody of the attorney general. And, to be literal, the attorney general has no right in El Salvador. This fellow in El Salvador says, well, you can't tell me what to do. I'm from El Salvador, which is such a farce because he's taking $6 million to
Yeah.
incarcerate these people. And if they said, we're only going to give you 5.9 million, we're not going to give you 100 grand to incarcerate that Abrego Garcia anymore. He'd be back here so fast if they weren't getting 100 grand to incarcerate him.
Mhm.
So obviously there's all kinds of real world pressures, Kim, that they could put on him in El
Mhm.
Salvador. But it is true that the attorney general doesn't have power in other countries except with leave of those other countries. So the idea that the attorney general could execute your sentence, let's say, of 7 years in federal custody by sticking you in someplace beyond federal custody, i.e., outside the United States, just on the face of it, is a violation of the statute. It's a violation of the sentence that you had been given. Now the question is, could they say, okay, we want to send you this hellhole prison. That is your sentence. I suppose the first thing they have to do is to pass a statute that would allow that. There's no
Mhm.
statute that allows that. I don't think that would ever win. Remember they had filibuster. It would never win 60 votes in the Senate. It's just, it's kind of a way to terrify people, own the libs, all that kind of stuff that Trump lives for as a performance artist. And so I just don't think that this would really go anywhere. And I think what he really would like to do in these terrorism cases, if he wanted to make an example of somebody. Now I tell you, people don't want to serve the rest of their life in prison. So could he get somebody to agree to serve 5 years in some foreign country instead of a life sentence? Sure, right? It's like they get people to go fight fires to get a lower sentence in state prison, right?
Mhm.
Could they get somebody to endure a lot of things, not to serve life in prison? So I
Mhm.
suppose that's one thing he could try to do to make an example of somebody, but it would be more like the prisoner exchange thing. It would be more like you would go back to this country, and it would be for people who are from those countries. I just don't see it working with any American citizens, although at some point, he could do a performance. Somebody would agree to 2 to 5 years almost in any prison to get out of a life sentence in the United States. And then he could say, you see, I sent this American citizen to some other place. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Incarceration for the rest of your life is so awful a prospect that people would substitute a whole lot of other scary things for it, maybe even a US citizen. But as something that people need to worry about, oh my God, I'll be grabbed off the streets like that poor lady who was grabbed off the streets at Tufts in
Mhm.
Boston. And we all saw her abducted on TV. It looked like she was being, I think she's Turkish. It looked like she was being abducted by the Turkish or Hungarian secret police, not in the
Right.
United States, right? With their masks on and everything else.
Yes.
But this is something that Trump wants to mention to sort of scare people and own the libs.
Mhm.
This is not a real thing.
There's another story with Trump and the courts. There's an executive order that Trump signed meant to punish a law firm, the one that sued Fox News. Remember them? The,
Sussman Godfrey, right? Sussman
that's
Godfrey. And if you
yes.
have the money, you should go out and hire Sussman Godfrey. They beat Fox. They
Yeah.
beat Fox for $1 billion. Fox, the
Mhm.
huge friend of the president, everything that Trump and all of their Republican allies could do, all the propaganda they could put on TV hour after hour, day after day. Guess what? Sussman Godfrey beat them. If you want a great law firm, go hire them. Don't boycott them. Go hire Sussman Godfrey. What's your question?
This U.S. District Judge's name is Lauren Ali Khan from the bench in her Washington, D.C. courtroom this week said Trump's order targeting this firm, Sussman Godfrey, was part of a personal vendetta. She said the framers of our Constitution would see this as a shocking abuse of power. And that's what he's doing, abusing power by going after anyone who could come after him.
Well, you know,
I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't know how we make this not be acceptable.
well, the 10 largest law firms in the country wouldn't sign on.
Yeah.
And they may not be the 10 largest law firms in the country very long, especially when the Democrats come back into power. Not because they're going to be punished, but they seem to think they're going to get such a huge bounce from being friends with Trump that it's going to endure forever. And, I'm old enough to remember most of these law firms when they were smaller. Now some of them are much bigger. They expand, they contract too. And so I think that putting all of your eggs in the Trump basket was a huge mistake for those 10 law firms. I think they should have all shown solidarity and stood with the smaller firms. People say, well, of course, those lawyers at the 10 largest law firms are up to $7, $8, $10 million a year in income per partner. And they are so upset at the idea of falling to maybe $5 or $6 million a year. It's like hearing Bernie Sanders speak, it's like, really,
Yep.
that's what it's all about. I mean, how about the great profession that we're in? It's just something to make money. It's just another way to make money. They might as well have all been investment bankers. That was their real dedication to the law. But again, the 10 largest law firms have not shown solidarity. They've not stood up. But the likes of this Sussman Godfrey, Jenner and Block, the big Chicago firm, Wilmer Hale, the big Washington, D.C. firm, they've all stood up. More than 500 law firms said they would stand up with them. And, the huge law firms, I guess they just start running in their mind the ways that, you can end up just losing out. You get a real $1 billion case. It's a huge merger, right?
Mhm.
And they need government approval for this huge merger. It's $100 billion merger. Imagine what the legal fees are earned by those enormous top 10 earning law firms. They lose that piece of business because someone says, you know what, that firm, they got they're not Trumpy enough. They may be huge, they may be famous, but they're not Trumpy enough. I'll hire somebody else. And they lose the legal fees on $100 billion merger. They think, you know what, we don't want it. We'll just make our peace with Trump. And if Trump wants us to do $50 million of pro bono work, $100 million worth of pro bono work for some cause that our law firm and Trump agree on, whatever that is, helping veterans, they say is going to be one of them. That sounds like a decent one. The anti-Semitism thing, the problem, Kim, is that there's a lot of people who think that if you question Netanyahu or you question the Israeli expanding settlements all over the place, that
Yeah.
somehow you're anti-Semitic. And so, that they're going to beat that drum for 50 or $100 million worth of legal fees. But again, if you think that you have a chance of losing the legal fees on $100 billion piece of business where you need the FTC's approval under Trump, you need the antitrust division's approval under Trump, you know what? Do the 50, do the 100 million. It's just a business decision. And the only thing I can say on behalf of those 10 huge law firms is lawyers do try to figure out how to help their client get through a very difficult situation. And this is a difficult situation for all the law firms. The most the most criticizable law firm in all of this is a victim. The perpetrator is Trump and this unprecedented action. And the last thing I want to say is that the framers of the Constitution would have been appalled by this.
Mhm.
Many of them, probably most of them, were lawyers. They understood that if you were going to have free elections, you weren't going to have a king, that you'd be in power, you'd be out of power, and that when you were out of power, you'd be working as lawyers and not discriminated against by the group in power. You'd be working as lawyers when you were out of power. That's what Alexander Hamilton did. He was, in fact, a criminal defense lawyer. By the way, Abraham Lincoln was also a criminal defense lawyer. I'm beating the drum for criminal defense attorneys
Mhm.
everywhere for all time in America.
I'm struck by, once again, the hypocrisy of the situation where before Trump was elected, he pointed to President Biden and said, oh, they're using the Department of Justice as a weapon. They're weaponizing the law. And that was child's play, if it even happened, compared to what's happening now. And now you see Trump's retribution tour completely using the Department of Justice to go after anyone and anything and every molecule of life that somehow Trump feels has disrespected him.
Well, it's projection, with Trump. when Trump
Mhm.
said he was weaponizing the Department of Justice, it's because Trump was thinking, that's what I would do. My goodness, I would sure weaponize it. All these people who annoy me, I could do tax audits of them. I could start FBI investigations of them. I could bring them up on trumped up charges.
Mhm.
Wow, that's what Biden's doing. It's all projection. And this is so ridiculous. It's so overblown because not only was our economy great, people may remember, okay, they didn't think that Biden was too old, he was too uncharismatic. He mumbled a little bit when he spoke. He mumbled a lot when he spoke. He stumbled. He mumbled and
Mhm.
stumbled. And look how great. If while we're having this conversation, if you want to look at your 401k or you want to look at the state of our civil rights in America, he didn't weaponize anything. I mean, Trump got more due process than anybody ever. Look at the cases they didn't go to trial right away. His two federal
Yep.
cases, instead of going to trial right away, they had all these motions. His January 6th case went all the way to the appellate court and it was stayed. He didn't have a trial. He didn't have a show trial. He had an appellate panel that heard him. Then he had the U.S. Supreme Court that made that very controversial, I think, unwarranted presidential immunity decision that they made. He wasn't locked up anywhere. He didn't serve a night in jail, even in the two state cases, 4 different cases against him. He had great lawyers. His lawyers were heard. They filed their motions. And then, of course, he had the cases. Remember this, he was convicted in the New York case. He's a convicted felon on 34 counts as we speak about him. He still had to pay that enormous amount of money to the woman for sexual assault in the New York City dressing room. That judgment still stands for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
I guess he's going to try to pay that out of the cryptocurrency. He's going to
Yeah.
cash some of that crypto. The guy down in El Salvador is a big crypto guy too. I mean, the corruption here is so rank. And just one last thing on the weaponization, one of the really bad breaks that the nation had, and we sure had a lot of them recently, and our reputation around the world, and the way we kind of knifed in the side our longtime allies, the Canadians, all of the awful things that have happened. There's like too many to name. We don't have enough time on the show to even do like the 10 highlights of the terrible things that Trump has done to our reputation throughout the world. But if one of the houses of Congress had stayed Democratic, we'd be in a totally different place
Mhm.
right now. If we had 51 Democratic senators, they wouldn't have approved Kash Patel. They wouldn't have had the nerve to even present Kash Patel. We wouldn't have Bondi as Attorney General. We wouldn't have RFK Jr. Oh my God, has he sullied the Kennedy name for people like like me and you're not young. You're too young.
Mhm.
But people like me who kind of revered the Kennedy name. Oh
Yeah.
my God, this Kennedy Jr. We wouldn't have had Tulsi Gabbard. None of these people would have gone through,
No.
and there would be if the House were Democratic, there'd be an investigation. He'd do something crazy every day like he does, and they would investigate how
Yeah.
he planned to make money and what the corrupt angle was of it every single day. And the Republicans have sat by. They figure, well, they have another year and a half, but it's a hard rain that's going to fall in the next election. This will be one of those where both houses go Democratic, and it'll be a totally different playing field. Unfortunately, what Trump and his allies see in that, in my opinion, is let's steal while we can. Let's do inside deals while we can. And the good news is that we still have the newspapers and we still have the media. So the New York Times, the Atlantic calls them out, including on what the group chat thing. I mean, that one was it could have been really dangerous for those
Yeah.
pilots who hadn't taken off yet for 2 hours when they broadcast that to the reporter and could have broadcast that to the world and probably did broadcast it to our enemies. Luckily, the Yemenis, I don't think were on the. It wasn't if it had been an attack against China. Believe me, China was listening to that. China would have shot the pilots right out. The American pilots, the heroes, they would have shot them right out of the sky because they were so lax with our secrets. But it wasn't classified. If those war plans weren't
Crazy.
secret, anybody who believes that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn, I'll sell you.
Let's talk for a moment about Harvard. You have a prestigious school, including Harvard Law School. There's a giant gaggle of lawyers at Harvard who likely won't take what Trump is trying to do to this school laying down. He's trying
Can
to
I just
remove.
can I just say the great joke? The great
Please, please.
the
Yes.
great joke was Trump rejected by Harvard yet again. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true. So he's going after their tax exempt status, in addition to pulling billions of dollars of federal funding from Harvard. And I saw this piece. It's produced by Democracy Now, but I looked the man up. His name is Andrew Manuel Crespo, and he's a Harvard law professor, the Morris Wasserstein Public Interest Professor of Law. He'd been appointed by President Biden to serve on the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court. He's a member of the American Constitution Society. So he's the real deal, right? And I think what he says here is chilling and interesting. Let's see the video, Albert.
That the Trump administration sent to my university Friday night that became public on Monday. One of his demands was to have the school appoint, or allow him to appoint, a federal overseer who would audit every course on this campus, every department, to try to figure out if it met the ideological balance that's preferred by the Trump administration. And that federal official would then require us to hire new teachers to teach the way that Trump wants us to teach, to change our courses. This is absolute outright efforts to take over federally what is taught on American campuses. It's a move that we see in countries across the globe when dictators are trying to come into power. In the demand.
Yeah, that's what we have. It's not just about DEI. It's about getting Harvard to teach what Trump wants them to teach. This is outrageous.
Well, one thing that's great is that Harvard has this enormous endowment, I think probably the largest in the country. So they certainly have the resources to fight. People said that about the huge law firms, that they had the resources to fight or to resist this pressure. And I guess you can say that, while the law firms want to project a certain image, these mega law firms want to project a certain image, they're really just about the money. They're really just about the money. And that even the image they try to project is to get the top law students to come there because it's a kind of a sales pitch to get the top law students to come there so they can all be just about the money. But the universities like Harvard are not just about the money. Nobody should be cynical enough to think that they're just about the money. They really do stand for something. They believe in something. I know I went to Berkeley, and Berkeley does, and I'm glad to see that Harvard does. And they're willing to spend some for their endowment. I don't think it's going to end up costing them any money. But Kim, the problem is they do this huge amount of medical research. They're developing cures and treatments right now for things that could affect the lives and the survival of a lot of people listening to watching your show right now. And that'll there's an obstacle, right? They'll cut off the money temporarily. They'll fight over the money, and the money needs to flow. To do the research studies, the money needs to flow. So Trump will, and RFK Jr., they'll cut off the money for these. That may be what RFK Jr. wants to do. He doesn't seem to believe in any of modern medicine, or the results that you see, the unimpeachable results that you see. But he reads some quack book, apparently RFK Jr., and says, well, let's do that with measles, and not what everybody knows ought to be done to abate measles. And so what Trump's action is going to do, Harvard's going to fight and win, but in the interim, they will interrupt a lot of this research. But Harvard, I think, had no choice to keep the money flowing for the research, medically necessary and important as it is. They just couldn't give into this. I mean, what a clown college this would be. Harvard, this great institution since the 1600s, and they're gonna hire some of his know-nothings. I mean, if he's got anybody on his staff who got into Harvard, I don't know. I'd sure like to hear about it. So it seems to me that they're all a bunch of D-teamers who never had a chance to get into Harvard and think this is great fun to try to give Harvard a hard time. Like there's some comparability over that. And the idea that they could tell them what teachers to hire. Also the DEI thing, people don't understand this DEI at all. These universities and these law firms, they do outreach to get fantastic candidates. They're supposed to not do the outreach. They're supposed to, like the colleges, the universities, they're supposed to not go to the high schools and have guidance counselors and have ways that they try to find the top graduates. Maybe there's somebody who's really smart, but just the community they're from, they don't think that they have a chance to go to Berkeley or a chance to go to Harvard. So let them know, right? Let them know that if you've got the grades, you've got the aptitude, you've got the drive, Harvard wants to see your application. Berkeley wants to see your application, or these law firms, maybe you're going to join a public interest firm. Well, they want you to know that they have public interest at their firm and that they're interested in you. And they're interested in having, representation, a law firm that looks like the community. That is what the DEI is. This idea that they're vaulting unqualified people, or they're taking some white person's job and giving it to some DEI. Or the other thing, they're giving a woman, 60% of people graduating from law school are women, that there's outreach to hire women lawyers. Like this thing with the FAA, you remember that, where they said, oh, that crash that happened at National Airport in Washington, D.C. was DEI. And then you find out it was a woman they were talking about. Oh my God, they gave someone who was a woman a traffic controller job, and she seemed like she was absolutely terrific. There was nothing about her that made anyone ever think that she was the reason for that crash. And yet that was the immediate reaction, wasn't it, by the Trump administration?
Yep,
DEI caused the accident.
Let's switch to this lawsuit filed by the state of California, the first state to sue Trump over these tariffs. California Governor Gavin Newsom and our state attorney general Rob Bonta filing suit, arguing Trump doesn't have the presidential authority to unilaterally impose these tariffs using the International Economic Emergency Powers Act because it violates the separation of powers doctrine. Any legs on this one?
I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's just a press stunt. This is one that Newsom really wanted to get behind. He didn't just let Bonta take the credit or hog the limelight. He wanted people to know that this was Governor Newsom's lawsuit. One reason is we are the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. People don't realize that. If you did the economies of the world, you did like the USA without California, it would be like the USA, I think, would still be number one. China would be right up there. We'd be fourth or fifth, all by ourselves, California. And it's having a huge impact on us selling, us exporting. We're the bread basket, we're the fruit basket of the world, selling to China and all these countries. And that's what they always do. They retaliate against our fruits and vegetables exported from California as a way to get back at the tariffs that Trump put on the first time, and the worst tariffs, the more damaging tariffs to the economy that he's putting on this time. So we really want to be out front on that. And we do have a huge interest in our economy. So I think it may be possible to have standing. I haven't really looked at the whole thing. That would be the fear, that we don't have the standing, but we are hurt. It's not just somebody, deciding that this is a separation of powers issue. We are really hurt in a direct way by these tariffs. And the argument is that only the Congress has the power to do this. I think that the law may be on the merits that Congress has given that power to the president, with the idea that they can then repudiate the tariffs that he imposes within 30 days or whatever. That was what they were starting to do when the tariffs were on every country in the world. It looked like even the Republican Senate, I think, was willing to do that with Canada. It looked like the Republican Senate might actually do that with the other countries. Then the House went into this year-long recess, according to them, where they were never going to vote on it. That was obviously gamesmanship. But as the pressure got worse and worse, probably the House would have come around. They would have had 4 or 5 Republican Congress members who would have voted with the Democrats. So there is a way to get rid of them. And so that may be, he may lose on the merits, that it was fine for Congress, although they could have kept that power and they could exert that power in other ways. The way they exerted the power was they said, in an emergency, we'll let the president impose tariffs. You can argue that this isn't a real emergency, but in an emergency, they said you can enact the tariffs, but within 30 days, we can call them off. And within 30 days, when they were just about to call them off, Trump, surrendered. He gave his bombastic speech. He declared victory, and he surrendered basically to every country except China. 10% is still not good on every country in the world, but he basically surrendered from his threats as to every country in the world. By the way, he's got that dominant thing. He's the big primate that dominates everybody. And yet he can't get the El Salvador president to do anything. He's getting played by the president of a little Central American, what he would call a banana republic. Trump can't get the head of a banana republic to do what he wants to do. If Ivanka were down there, believe me, somehow or other, there would be a way for Trump to be the dominant, the dominant primate again. So
yeah,
it's very frustrating what's going on. But I don't think that. We'll see how the suit goes. I wouldn't bet on it.
I've kept you too long, but on your way out, I wanted to give you a chance to comment on this lawsuit against Meta and basically Mark Zuckerberg. The Federal Trade Commission trying to look at Meta's acquisitions to Instagram, WhatsApp, all of these things. And Zuckerberg testified. How do you see this going?
Well, you see why Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos want to try to cripple and hobble those investigatory agencies. You see why they want to cut people, inspectors general, along with Trump, because these people have real power. And you really worry that, what did Balzac say? Behind every great fortune is a great crime. And these investigatory agencies really look at, was there a great crime? Was there, collusion? Was there market manipulation? And especially by companies with monopoly power. One of the issues is whether Zuckerberg's company has, market, monopoly power in this. I tend to think they do have monopoly power, but that's one of the issues for the district judge. But, it's these investigatory agencies that build up the cases, like the FTC in this situation. So a company like it's Meta, right? Mm-hmm. Meta has they have the option to either what they call buy or build. And what they're trying to show is that they did acquire all these other companies, Instagram and so forth, as a way to monopolize the market, as a way to dominate the market. And that, they made a better camera, so they decided to take over that camera. They wrote a memo that sort of is on the side of, they tried to just buy their way to a monopoly rather than to build their way to a monopoly, competing. And so it's a kind of technical to a lot of people, the testimony, but it basically as to whether they had monopoly power, and if they had monopoly power in that field that Meta and Instagram both occupy, whether they were, manipulating it to keep prices up, to restrict consumer preference, to consumer choice. So they would basically corner the market and raise prices as monopolists. And that's what these agencies are looking at. That's what the federal judge has to decide. And it looks like it's not going Zuckerberg's and Meta's way, which is, I think, why he took the stand today, because he figured, if we're going down, at least I want to testify and see what I can do in front of the judge. And I think it may not be going their way because they did exactly as charged. I mean, I don't know. People have trouble understanding that these are huge trusts. These are huge monopolies. In the same way at the turn of the century, Teddy Roosevelt went after those trusts. These are the current day trusts. These are the current day monopolies. That's why prices are so high and true consumer selection seems to be so low.
There's a breaking news story that just came out that I'll ask you about, which is that the United States Supreme Court has just announced that they will be hearing a challenge to Trump's plan to end birthright citizenship. And they will be hearing this case apparently in May. Is that surprising to you that they've decided to take this on? This one seems cut and dried to me, but maybe it's not.
It's cut and dry, but it's, I think, provocative enough. It's I think, resulted in 4 or 5 different cases. And in every single case, the judge has said that the federal judge has said the Constitution is very clear. It says born in the United States. And I mentioned this before on your show, but there's actually a precedent. It's not just in the plain language of the Constitution. This is not the original Constitution from the late 1700s. This is the one after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment. And the one after the Civil War in the 14th Amendment says that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States, to paraphrase it. And then the decision at the turn of the century, like around 1900, early 1900s, is by a person born of parents who were not legally in the country. Parents had no status in the country, but he was born in the United States. He stopped at the border, told he can't enter the United States because he's not a citizen. The U.S. Supreme Court decided, yes, you are a citizen by the mere fact that you were born in the United States, although your parents had no proper immigration status. That seems like a cut and dry precedent. I know they did what they did in Dobbs, but I don't think they're going to reverse that precedent. And I think they're going to put that one to bed, maybe 9-0. And of course, from a PR point of view, it's good for the U.S. Supreme Court in this environment, after all the decisions they've had that were in favor of Trump, to issue a decision that people can say, look, 9-0. You see, they really are independent. They really are a third branch of government. They didn't back the president on this one. But this is a press release issue. This is send it out over the internet. This is not a real thing. There is no real prospect that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to say the Constitution doesn't mean exactly what it says, or that they're going to overturn that precedent. So if anybody's actually worried about it, if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen.
Thank you, David Katz. I appreciate that. And I'm glad we got that story in before we have to say goodbye. I'm so grateful that you came on today. I'll see you next Thursday. Thank you for being here. And thank you for all of your wise and sage opinions today.
Next time you have me and Pat Thurston on the same day, have us have a little overlap, okay?
I will. I'll do it. I'll have a little meetup here on the Mark Thompson show.
All the best to Pat Thurston, and all the best to you, and the best to Mark.
Thanks, David Katz. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.